Well, he must now decide how he will lead a church with 1.4 billion faithful across the globe and how he'll tackle with the scourge of clerical sex abuse. His predecessor, Pope Francis, implemented some reforms, but critics say he came to it all too late. If you were listening to OS last week, you might remember that I spoke to two survivors of clerical sex abuse, Chris O'Leary and Tony Gribben. Here's a little of that conversation, and I should warn you that it contains graphic details that some might find distressing.
In 2019, I went to the Archdiocese of St. Louis and said, Pope Francis has put in place this new law called Vos Estis. I'm here asserting my rights under Vos Estis, and I need help. And the Archdiocese of St. Louis said, give us your phone number, we'll call you back, and they never called me back. I've kind of shifted into survivor advocate mode ever since.
Could you just explain to us what Vos Estis was?
Vos Estis does two things, or did two things. It gives survivors a Bill of Rights, and it also presents a code of conduct for bishops. Basically, it says survivors, we're going to help you, and tells bishops, here are things you can and cannot do. The bottom line is Pope Francis has had no, at least positive impact on my experience as a survivor in terms of getting help, in terms of, assistance processing what happened to me both as a child and then as an adult.
Can I ask you, Chris, I have met survivors of clerical sex abuse here in Italy, and all of them that I have met, it struck me always that the scourge of sexual abuse, it stays with them their entire lives. Could you just explain to us what it has been like for you?
Well, I'm divorced. My marriage fell apart in 2007. I ended up losing my job. I ended up going bankrupt. My marriage was ended. I mean, there's several things going on. You get the problems of the primary abuse. It started with touching. It went far beyond touching. It went as far as you could imagine. When I was a child, I was raped by a priest. It's very difficult to see Catholics talking about how we were just touched and that was it. But then there's also this concept that I use called the abuse of the abused, which is all of the psychological stuff that happens when, as an adult, you're trying to get help. And unfortunately, and to the point, that all continued and to a degree escalated under the papacy of Pope Francis. It's all encompassing. It affects your sexuality, it affects your relationships, it affects your ability to trust other people.
Tony, how about for you?
There is an assumption that somehow over time that you get over the fact that you've been violated as a child sexually. Of course, that's absolute nonsense. What we find is that certainly, for myself, I found that actually speaking up and stepping forward and taking on more of an advocacy role that actually has it's made me much more resilient in carrying this baggage with me. But, we hear it again and again from the church, both at the level of Rome and the Vatican, as well as down into local parishes, with, the apologies, the thoughts and the prayers was absolutely meaningless.
I really don't have any faith in the Catholic Church and couldn't care less who the next pope is, because I don't think it will make a difference at all.
Abuse survivors Chris O'Leary and Tony Gribben there. We reached out to the Archdiocese of St. Louis about the case and got no response. Now, serious accusations have also been made about Pope Leo's handling of sexual abuse cases during his time as Bishop of Chiclayo in Peru. We can speak now to our South America correspondent Ione Wells, who is in that city in Peru. Ione, good to talk to you. Just explain what the allegations centre on.
Well, essentially, they centre on claims that were made in April 2020 by 3 women accusing a priest of sexual abuse. They say these claims dated back to 2007, so they spanned the period where he was a bishop in Chiclayo. Now, the diocese that he used to run put out a statement in response to these allegations at the time, saying that women had made allegations and that when when they were raised in April 2020, the accused priest was asked to withdraw from the ministry while it was investigated. They also say that women were given access to support from professionals within the church. The statement went on to say, though, that when the women raised the case with a civic court, a prosecutor said there wasn't enough evidence, and that led to the case being closed. But the allegations are essentially that when he was bishop of this diocese, he didn't really do enough to tackle the problem. The women have repeatedly made claims, including on social media in the past, that they didn't receive enough support. There was no thorough investigation in their view, and that they received at a very young age abuse from this priest in particular.
And those claims were investigated by the Vatican, and Vatican authorities gave a response.
Well, that's right. Essentially, the diocese has said that they referred it up to the Vatican to also look at this case, and a combination of both sort of the Vatican and the prosecutor locally not believing there was enough evidence to go forward with it meant that this case was essentially thrown out. They also claimed that the victims were called in to testify, but that only one attended. This again is something, though, that the women have denied. After these denials were put out by the diocese, sort of on behalf of them and the Vatican, the women put out a joint statement in 2024 saying that no proper investigation was carried out, that precautionary measures weren't taken. They shared photos, for example, of the priest in question still attending certain events, for example, on behalf of the church, which they said disproved this idea that precautionary measures were taken to sort of protect other people from him while this investigation was ongoing. So I think, in theory, basically the women in question have continued to challenge these claims, but here locally it does sort of divide opinion depending who you speak to. I've spoken to some people who have worked with him, including I worked at the parish where that accused priest was. They are very supportive of Pope Leo. They say that he did sort of take action, he did do everything he could, and that there wasn't enough evidence. However, these allegations have gained traction really in recent years, with many questioning why these women's allegations don't seem to have been addressed properly.
Ione Wells in Chiclayo in Peru, thanks very much indeed. Well, you heard just before we spoke to Ione a little bit of that conversation with Chris and Tony, both survivors of clerical sexual abuse. We have reached out to them again to get their reaction to Pope Leo. Here's what Chris had to say first.
I'm not going to lie. I found the naming of Cardinal Prevost as Pope Leo XIV. My initial reaction was that it was very troubling, that it was very disturbing. I thought it was potentially a disaster for the Catholic Church and for survivors. That's based on some reports that I've heard about his handling of abuse in Chiclayo, the story of the three sisters, the appearance of caring, underneath it all, an arrogant indifference, a clericalism that really speaks to the root of the Catholic sex abuse crisis. The concern for survivors is that the Catholic Church really seems to be entering or trying to enter a post-survivor era. The Catholic Church has moved on, and it believes that survivors need to move on. And I'll ask the question as always, how? When I was a child, I was raped by a priest. That's a big deal. Talk is cheap. Show me. I'd be more than glad to come to Rome, to the Vatican, to have an audience with the new Pope Leo to discuss the reality of life for survivors in St. Louis and around the world. Please take me up on that. Show me.
This is Tony Gribben. I'm the coordinator of the Dromore Group, which represents a group of men sexually abused as children in the Diocese of Dromore in Ireland. Now, before the conclave, we already had questions about Cardinal Prevost's credentials to lead the Catholic Church. This is particularly set against the allegations of his mishandling of sexual abuse in Peru. Pope Leo inherits Pope Francis's Vos Estis policy. Now, very quickly, Vos Estis is an elaborate reporting system for the Church on clerical sexual abuse, but it's achieved nothing. Now, can we expect Pope Leo to pick up Vos Estis, to build on it, even improve it? I think that's very unlikely.
Thanks to Tony Gribben and Chris O'Leary for those messages, both survivors of clerical sex abuse.